Okay, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the first webinar from the Center for Financial Security. We have a series of webinars planned for 2011, and we're thrilled to kick off the series with this session about financial advice. I'm going to give just a little bit of opening remarks, and then we're going to turn it to Michael Collins, who has done some research on financial advice, and then we have two discussants, Donna Taglianetti and Emily Waterbury, who are going to give the practitioner's view of the research. So just to start, today's webinar really is going to be talking about how important it is to seek financial advice. We're going to get some insight about who financial advice helps the most, how financial advice could be integrated into financial education and financial capability programs. And the goal of the session really is not only to present the research, but also to really talk about the research from a practical application standpoint. We have two practitioners on the line that will help give us some information about what this research means for the field. They're going to give us some feedback about how it aligns with what they're seeing in the field, and then we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So just to give you a few housekeeping remarks, the way that this call is designed, all of the participants are on mute. We have about 100 participants on the call, so if we had even a little bit of background noise from everybody, we wouldn't be able to hear the speakers. So everyone is on mute, and the way that we will have you interact is to submit questions. So if you all are on the webcast portion of the webinar, if you look at the screen right below where it says ICS webcast, there's some icons below that, and the second icon that looks like a little bubble, you know, that you would kind of see in the comics sometimes, that's what you use to submit questions. So if you click on that icon, you'll get a little screen that says Ask a Question, and you can put your name and the question. And when you're writing the question, you can either direct the question specifically to one of the panelists, or you can just make it general. But that's the way that we will facilitate all your questions during the webinar. So please feel free, you know, even while the presentations are going on, if you have a question, just go ahead and submit it immediately. That way, when we get to the Q&A portion, we can hopefully get through as many questions as possible and have a really rich discussion. Also, I should let you know that the webinar will be archived, so if there are people that weren't able to attend, let them know that the webinar will be posted on the Center for Financial Security website. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started so we don't waste too much time. So as I mentioned, Michael Collins is going to give the first presentation. He actually has written a paper that you can find on the Center for Financial Security's website called A Review of Financial Advice Models and the Take-Up of Financial Advice. So that's what he's going to be sharing highlights from today. And just to give you a little bit of background information for those of you who may not know Michael Collins, he's the assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And there he teaches personal finance, and he is a faculty affiliate of the Institute for Research on Policy, the Lafayette School on Public Affairs, and Wisconsin Cooperative Extension. Michael's also the faculty director of the Center for Financial Security, and the Center for Financial Security is the Social Security Administration Financial Literacy Research Consortium Center. Boy, that's a mouthful. And that's a multidisciplinary project which focuses on financial literacy for vulnerable populations. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Michael. And again, for those of you who are on the webcast, you'll actually get to see Michael on the screen. So we'll turn to Michael first, and then we'll go to our discussants.
Great. Thanks very much, Karen. I want to thank everybody for being part of this call today, and especially to Donna and Emily for being willing to talk a bit about their thoughts as practitioners about what this research means. As Karen said, I am the faculty director of the Center for Financial Security. We spent the last year researching a number of financial topics related to personal finance. This is just one of them. You can hear about some others in other projects that are taking place on future webinars. But today we're going to talk about financial advice and financial counseling, and specifically about personal finance. Who gets financial advice, and what does financial advice look like? The project is funded by the Financial Literacy Research Consortium of the Social Security Administration, and as this slide shows, we just want to make sure we acknowledge that support, but also acknowledge that the opinions that are presented here are really those of me, of Donna and Emily, and not those of the university or the Social Security Administration. So thinking about this project, what do we want to talk about? First, we wanted to help define what advice models are. What is it when we say financial advice, and what different kinds of flavors of financial advice exists out there? We want to talk a little bit about who are advice providers. What does this market look like? And what role does financial advice play for individuals in its various forms and flavors? And ultimately, what we'd really like to know is, does financial advice make a difference? This paper doesn't really give us a chance to evaluate financial advice, but we did look at the research that's been done already on financial counseling and advice. So we have some sense of what we think role financial advice might play. But mostly what we look at is the last question: who takes up financial advice? There's a strong feeling in the financial capacity building or financial literacy community that for people who lack financial knowledge, who lack financial literacy, advice may be able to fill the gap. If you don't know what you're doing, you can go to an expert and they can help you do it. So we want to explore this. Is this true? Is this the folks that are primarily using financial advice, are they in fact the people who would be defined as financially less literate or more financially vulnerable? So we want to look at that question specifically. Before we get started, though, I want to think a little bit about the framework under which we're thinking about financial advice. Financial advice is a big field. It's everything from the brochures and pamphlets and disclosures that are related to financial products to the computer emails that people might get related to certain accounts. So we want to really think about the financial capacity building marketplace in a broad way. On the one end, we have what we call information models. These would be purely to get information from a provider into an individual. So this could be on the internet, it could be face-to-face, it could be a workshop, it could be a traditional classroom setting. But these are more informational models. These are things like terms and definitions, understanding how things work, that kind of thing. On the other end, we have more mechanism models, as we call it. These are where you don't need to know very much because we do things automatically for you. So an example might be a 401k automatic default. We're going to put you into a retirement program or a specific amount of money. You don't have to make that decision unless you opt out of it. So in between the one end of the mechanism models and the other end of information models, there's this middle ground that we call advice models. Advice models might involve some product mechanism, and they might involve some information sharing, but mostly they're to help people make decisions in the moment, sort of direct advice. And within this area of advice models, we can think about 3 and potentially 4 different varieties of advice that might be out there. The first is what we call a technical expert. A technical expert is somebody who is dealing with some very sophisticated kinds of questions, things like the law, tax accounting rules, issues of estate planning, very technical issues which any one of us probably could understand if we took the time and energy to learn them. But for us to learn them for one decision might be rather inefficient. It might make more sense for us to go to somebody who deals with this every day and deals with multiple people in that way. Oftentimes, the technical expert is a credentialed expert. They have a series of alphabet letters behind their name, be it law or finance or some other kinds of expertise. Next, there's a big category of advice providers that we call transactional guides. Transactional guides are essentially salespeople. Transactional guides help you get through a transaction. Now, not all salespeople are compensated based on the transaction taking place, but many are. So it's a market where we worry a lot about whether the advice being given is the best for the consumer or the best for the seller of the advice or the seller of the product. So it's a somewhat confusing, although I'll argue not as problematic as some may assume. The next sort of facet of advice models we could think about is counseling. And I would define counseling as being a very specific form of advice that is related to acute problem solving. People who have a problem that need to be solved sort of in the moment. And oftentimes these are negative kinds of events. People need counseling because they have a severe financial problem of some kind. They can't pay their bills. They're facing bankruptcy. They're coming out of bankruptcy, foreclosure. And those would be some of the places we see counseling taking place. Not always, but frequently because of negative financial events. And then finally, within advice models, we have this category of financial coaching, which is a relatively new comer to the scene. And oftentimes the term coaching is used in a lot of different ways. Sometimes counselors or even transactional agents may use the term coach to describe their work because they like how it sounds. But we're thinking about coaching in this sense to be a little bit different than these other kinds of models, in that we see a coach as not necessarily being an expert. And in fact, it's grayed out in the image that you see on the screen because it's not fully an advice model. A coach is more there to help you, once you've decided what to do, to stick with it. So a coach helps you with issues of self-control and paying attention to the details that you need to do to get your goal done. So a coach may not, in fact, be an advisor at all. They may not be an expert, but rather somebody holds you accountable to get done what it is that you thought you wanted to get done. So it's a slightly different flavor, but I would still categorize it more in the advice category than an information or a mechanism category. So that's sort of the broad framework as we think about how advice models break down, and hopefully that's a useful map to think about where advice fits into the overall financial capacity building field, and where within advice models, each form of advice that you might be involved in might make a place. So thinking about each of these four categories in more detail. Technical experts is a relatively precise kind of category of advice givers. These tend to be experts. These tend to be people who have advanced training in a particular area of the law or of finance, and who, even within that field, have more expertise. So some subset related to small businesses, or some subset related to aspects of some financial management topic. So oftentimes very narrow. Ideally, these are objective providers. You are paying them for their technical expertise. They are not trying to sell you a product. They are not doing anything, but you're paying them for their time, and for the knowledge that they have acquired. Typically, as I mentioned before, these are credentialed. These are people who have a credential after their name because they have gotten some form of education, passed some sort of test, and are credentialed by some sort of credentialing body. The other thing I would say that's pretty much true about technical experts is they tend to be costly. Acquiring these kinds of skills and credentials is not a low-cost proposition, so accessing these kinds of services oftentimes is quite expensive. But that's sort of the technical experts category. Why do we need these technical advisors? Well, I think the biggest reason that we can argue from a sort of economic standpoint is that obtaining very technical information, if I needed to learn a lot about estate law, I could probably do that, but it might take me hours and hours and hours of research to try to understand this information. I don't know the terms. I'd have to be really starting from ground zero in terms of understanding the language of estate law and trying to figure out how that all works. So if I can go to an expert, he or she may be able to help me in a couple of hours, as opposed to me spending dozens of hours just trying to understand the basics of it. So it's actually cheaper for me to go to an expert who can help me make a decision or can help me understand some technical information. So essentially this is an argument that it's cheaper. The cost is lower of using somebody else who has this expertise. The second reason we might think about a technical expert as being important is that technical experts might deal with people like me every day. They might deal with 4 or 5 clients a day that have technical problems. So while I can't really know how my technical problem is going to play out over the course of my lifetime until I live my lifetime, they get to essentially watch lots of people's lifetimes involved. So they can see what traps people make and what mistakes they make, and they can learn from that experience and then apply that to you as a client. So advisors can use this multiple experiences they get from multiple clients, learn from that, and then teach us as advisees to avoid those mistakes. I think the last reason is even if the information itself isn't necessarily highly technical, it may be just easier for us to use somebody else to help us make these decisions. You can think of lots of things that you might pay somebody else to do in your life. So everything from babysitting to cleaning to, who knows, any number of other things, yard work, whatever else that you don't really have a taste for. The same could be true for technical advisors. We might look to them to take care of things that, while we could spend the time and energy to do it, or may even know how to do this from our own work or otherwise, we want to go have somebody else do it just because we don't have a taste for it. So the second category of advisors is the transactional agent. Now, the transactional agent, as I said, this is somebody essentially who's a salesperson. Maybe they're a broker, maybe they're a real estate agent, maybe they're an insurance agent, but they're trying to sell some kind of a product. Typically, their compensation is linked to the product, the size of the product, the terms of the product. And so they are giving advice to their clients, quote-unquote clients, about particular products. But their advice may be biased in that advice might lead people to choose products which aren't the products they would have chosen in the absence of that advisor. In other words, the advisor steered them into products that were more costly they might have originally wanted. Some of them do have credentials, and this can be quite confusing. In the paper, we list a couple of pages of these alphabet soup of acronyms that are out there. Many of these credentials are very robust and actually do have highly ethical standards about how transactional agents should behave. many of them are less so, that they're relatively easy credentials to receive and don't have much teeth behind them. Oftentimes, these are self-regulated areas, so it's more voluntary adherence to rules that are set forth by a trade association as opposed to anything that's enforced by any sort of government or other kind of body. The big concern about transactional agents is that they are biased, that they will lead people to make decisions that aren't in their own best interest. I'll talk a bit about this, but in general, if transactional agents were always very biased, no one would use transactional agents because people would learn from their mistakes. So we do worry a bit about this issue of transactional agents sort of leading people into decisions that they wouldn't otherwise want to do. But in general, we think this is a market that probably works fairly well. So the biggest thing we think about is this conflict of interest. Is there a conflict of interest? And certainly economic theory would tell us that there could be a strong conflict of interest where people may be ripped off, in essence, by the salesperson or by the transactional agent. But the truth is that most transactional agents, most sales agents, you think about an insurance agent or a mortgage broker or somebody else, is that they're not just living for the deal today, they're living for the future deal as well. And if you have a poor experience, you're going to tell the people that you know not to work with that particular agent. And that reputation risk really matters. So in that case, there's actually a strong disincentive for transactional agents to play that kind of role. There's certainly a lot of discussion at a policy level right now about the role of what we call fiduciary duty, which is a part of the law that goes back to English common law and has been around for a long time. And fiduciary duty is certainly something that I think policymakers are right to be focused on. But we need to recognize, too, that fiduciary duty and some of the behaviors that fiduciary duty tries to instill in transactional agents aren't necessarily going to solve the problem of conflict of interest. Fiduciary duty says that the agent should act in the best interest of the consumer within the narrow confines of whatever the particular product or decision being made is. But again, the repeated game sort of reputation risk is still there, so even people without fiduciary duty may behave as if they do have fiduciary duty. And certainly we've seen many examples of providers who have fiduciary duty who still violate those rules, and consumers end up on the wrong side of that. Another area that is sort of increasing attention in the financial industry is this idea of fee-only advisors, of advisors or salespeople who don't actually receive any commission, but just get paid for the time, much more like a technical advisor might be, or fee-only advisor. So we looked a bit at the fee-only market and how the fee-only market might work. It turns out that they're relatively rare in practice. There are many fee-only financial planners and financial advisors out there, but oftentimes that's just a part of their business. Oftentimes they may have some business that's compensated by sales transactions or commissions, and some that's fee-only, so it's a mix. And there hasn't been a lot of study on whether consumers are better off going one way or the other. And certainly we found stories of people who are better off under one regime or another. So the fee only certainly makes some consumers feel much more at ease about the potential conflict of interest, and seems to be popular among some consumers. But the supply of fee only advisors is relatively thin in a lot of parts of the country. So next we have the category of financial counseling, which may be one that people are becoming more and more familiar with. The last few years, financial counseling has really grown dramatically, particularly in response to the foreclosure crisis and the amount of financial counseling and credit counseling that's gone on in the last few years. But again, we're defining counseling as being specifically around acute problem solving, people who have experienced some sort of negative trigger event, typically negative, and they need some kind of an intervention, they need to get through that intervention. Oftentimes we're talking about people who have issues of financial management that have mounted over time. So we've had problems with budgeting or with credit management, and those problems sort of mount, and eventually it comes to the point where something has to be done, some action has to be taken. Sometimes it's triggered by a life event, a health crisis, a divorce, some sort of other event in somebody's life that causes some problems. Oftentimes people in financial counseling are facing emotional stress, and so the role of the counselor is really to help people make better financial decisions despite the fact that they are facing, perhaps crises at home, they have crises at work, or maybe lack of employment, an income cut, issues with children, lots of other emotional stresses in their lives, so it's hard to make any kind of decision, let alone a technical financial decision. One thing about counseling that's generally true, that's not true in some of the other areas, is that many counselors are part of nonprofit agencies. Oftentimes nonprofit agencies that have subsidy from federal or state government or sometimes local governments. So we have this strong sort of public sector role and nonprofit sector role that we might not see in other parts of the advice field. Generally, the reason for that is because these counselors are not generally compensated by selling any kind of product. So the people that they're serving oftentimes can't afford to pay a fee, and they're not selling products that have any associated commissions. And so as a result, the only other thing to do is try to find third-party support, whether that's public sector or charitable support for these services. There are some counseling services that are linked to products, but those are relatively rare in the whole grand scheme of things. The last category of advice models would be financial coaching. As I said, this is a relatively new phenomenon. It's sort of on the fringe, I would say, of the advice models because financial coaches may not necessarily be technical experts at their particular area. What they're really focused on is helping clients reach the goals that they set out for themselves. It's focused on performance improvement, so it's assuming that people have some basic level of financial knowledge and financial behavior that they're trying to build upon to improve. It's typically client-directed and goal-based, so the client has a goal that they want to achieve. The coach doesn't make any kind of assumptions or any judgment about whether that's the right goal. They just hold the person accountable to achieve that goal. The coach may be an expert, but oftentimes coaches are not experts. They're really only an expert in holding people accountable to what they said they were going to do as opposed to any technical financial topics. Their real focus is on self-control and monitoring people, holding them accountable to get done what they said they were going to do. Think of a coach in an athletic context. This is similar kind of a situation. You can also think about this being more about adherence or more implementation, whereas some of the financial counseling might be related to somebody making an immediate decision dealing with a crisis today. Financial coaching might be looking out more over a time span to help people implement the plan that they came up with their financial planner, advisor, technical expert, or counselor, and then adhere to whatever that plan is. So it sort of helps them implement and adhere to whatever their initial plan was. Okay, so thinking about this whole advice field, what does the past research say? Well, the truth is that for as much attention as, at least within the financial capacity building field, that financial coaching, financial counseling, financial advice gets, there aren't that many studies, particularly studies that we have a valid comparison group. So many studies just look at people who got a service, but we don't have anybody else to compare them to. And what we know is that people who get the services are different. They came into that service either because they had a problem or because they were highly motivated or because they were seeking a particular kind of product or a particular kind of solution. And so they're different from people who didn't come in. And so it's very hard to find a comparison group to find out who might really have gotten a boost, an extra benefit from getting that particular form of financial advice. We can see across the literature, and this is a main finding from the literature, is that people who seek out advice, particularly investment advice or financial advice, are oftentimes among the most financially capable. People who look for financial advice tend to be among the most educated, the wealthiest, the most highest income. So we have this strong bias towards people who have already pretty high levels of skills. The other finding we have is that at least among highly technical kinds of topics, like, for example, changes in tax laws or legal issues, there may be a very valuable role of advice in this role. And oftentimes the more technical or the more rapid a change that's implemented, the more that people may get some help from that. So there's been some studies where there's been a change in a tax law or something like that, and they find that people who get advice are more likely to adapt to that change more rapidly. In terms of the counseling literature, there are a number of studies looking at financial counseling, and some of those have outcomes that are comparable to another group. And when the more careful the researchers are and how these are designed, the smaller the effects tend to be. So the effects of these kinds of advice models tend to be relatively modest. But I would say overall, this is a very young literature. We lack very robust methods, and who seeks the advice really matters. We call this selection effects in academia. We worry a lot about who selects into, who voluntarily shows up and follows through with the service. And we also have a huge range of services within this field, so it's very hard to generalize across them. Okay, so what do we try to do in this study? We really just tried the answer of who takes up advice. And what we wanted to really test was, is financial advice an antidote, so to speak, for people with lower financial literacy levels? Is it basically a substitute for lacking financial knowledge? We looked at the FINRA Financial Capacity Building Survey. It was a survey conducted in 2000, 2009. There was both a national study and a state study, so we looked at the national study in this. And what we looked at is a series of questions about, in the last 5 years, have you gotten any kind of financial advice? And they broke that down to debt counseling, savings or investments, taking out a mortgage or a loan, insurance of any type, and tax planning. So we've used a technique here called regression to try to figure out, controlling for other factors, who is most likely to get advice. And you can see from this graph, which is a very simple graph of income level and who got any form of advice, that the more money people make, the more likely they are to get advice. So already we start to doubt this idea that advice might be a substitute for financial capacity. Same thing with education level. The higher the education level, the more likely people are to get advice. Now you might argue, well, the more education people have, the more wealth they have, the more they need advice. So the next thing we tried to do was just control for all of that. Control for education level, for gender, for race, for their income level, for their home ownership status, a bunch of other things. And we find pretty consistently that taking up financial advice across different categories is highly correlated with having higher financial literacy levels. People who can better answer factual questions about personal financial topics are more likely to seek out financial advice of most kinds. So we don't find a strong correlation. We find that generally as income rises, controlling for other factors, you're more likely to take up financial advice. So it's a pretty strong story, not of substitution of advice for financial literacy or financial capacity, but actually complementariness. So the more financial literacy and education that people have, the more likely they are to seek out financial advice, which is kind of what we saw from the other literature, but the opposite of what we might have thought in the beginning. We did also look at some other questions about attitudes toward financial advisors, and we didn't find a real clear story there. It's not as if lower income or lower financial literacy people distrust advisors, or they find advisors too expensive. Certainly income, the less income people make, the more they think that advisors might be too expensive. But in general, there isn't a clear story about this being perceptions. It seems to be more about access and the availability of advisors to them. So overall conclusions here, I think this literature is very young. We certainly think that advice models have potential, and I hope that this general framework that I presented in the beginning is helpful. But I do think that overall we need to think about financial advice as being a complement to financial literacy education and financial education, not a substitute. We need both and. The compensation schemes may matter, but may not matter as much as you might think because of this issue of reputation risk. Overall, the empirical evidence, meaning really controlled studies, especially studies that might have a randomized control trial, are very rare, and so we don't have clear evaluations of the impact. And it's clear that those who have the most financial capability are the most likely to get advice. And so there actually have been some researchers who said this is essentially a babysitter model, that we are paying advisors to do for us what we could do for ourselves anyway. But I think the context may be very important. There may be certain points in our lifespans where having an advisor or a counselor are very important, especially if it's technical information or if we're under stress, say, of a negative trigger event, of a job loss, of something like that. So it may very much matter upon how and when advice is implemented.
Okay. Hang on one second.
So just thinking about next steps, I think in terms of the research community and practitioners, we need to think more about the psychology of advice, and particularly as the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is implemented and the DOD Act over the next year, think more about how fiduciary duty works. I would argue as a researcher we need more field experiments and better portfolio kind of measures. Many studies now just look at net wealth. So you get some advice and then does your net wealth go up? And we probably need better measures of both the psychological and financial measures of how it might affect people. Counseling I think is a growing field. It's a very diverse field. There are lots of different kinds of counseling in different kinds of contexts. So we need to better understand who comes in for counseling. Are they people who are in severe trouble? Or are they people who are highly motivated, and how that might affect the results that we have? And then finally, coaching, which I think you're going to hear a bit about from both Emily and Donna, certainly has a lot of potential. And I think what's important about coaching is that it recognizes that behavior gets beyond just knowledge. It gets into how we implement what we want to do and what role of self-control is. Again, we need more empirical work on coaching, but what I like about coaching is that it helps us think more about implementation and how do people stick to the plan that they set forth. So with that, I'll wrap up. I'll let Donna and Emily say their piece, and then hopefully we'll get some questions from the field.
Great. Well, I'll do just a
Okay, we'll go ahead and turn this over to Donna. Donna, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And Donna, I'm just going to ask you to speak up a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, can I do a quick introduction of Donna?
Yes, please.
Great. I think Michael's presentation is a perfect segue to Donna. As Michael talked about, coaching is kind of this emerging field. I think Donna is one of the pioneers in the field. Donna is currently the executive director of Co-Opportunity, and since 2003, she's really focused on increasing the income, earnings, and assets of low and moderate families in Connecticut. I think what's particularly interesting about Donna as it relates to this conversation is that for the past 3 years, Donna, through her work at Co-Opportunity, has created a program where she's recruited and trained corporate volunteers to provide budget coaching to low-income working families. And the program has been cited as a best practice by the National Community Tax Coalition and by the United Way Worldwide. So I think she's in a perfect position to give us some feedback about what she sees in the field in relation to financial advice and coaching.
Thank you, Karen. One thing that I want to just make note of is if you went back to a couple of slides that Michael showed, that even among the lowest educated and the lowest income, it was still about 40% of those surveyed who sought out financial advice, and I still think that's pretty significant. As Karen said, Co-Opportunity operates a financial coaching program, but we also do other work related to financial services. So we're a HUD housing counseling agency where we work with first-time home buyers. We provide financial education classes, and we also do financial counseling. So I would say that, in general, the people who come to us are low, moderate income households, and they tend to come to us for one of three reasons. Either because they want to get more educated, and so they attend a class, although often we find that has to do with the fact that they have a problem that they're trying to solve. The potential homeowner comes to us because they typically have very little experience. They're first-time home buyers who have little experience dealing with mortgages or financial institutions and need advice. And then the third group are those who come to us because they're either in crisis or they have a financial crisis that's sort of looming in the horizon, and they have come to a point where they really feel like they need to get some help. I'd say that last group is the least likely to stick long-term with a model, an assistance model. They want their problem solved, and once that problem is solved, they'll sort of move on. I think that while we provide services that address all of those presenting issues, almost always, if there's a closer examination of those, we find that there's just really a pattern of financial management that's problematic, and as a result, we think that coaching is a good match. And we sort of, Michael used the phrase babysitting model before, and I sort of think of it as, our clients are sort of like people who need to diet. They know what good nutrition is, but yet they don't do it. Well, many of the people we see are people who know what they need to do. They have some idea of what good financial management is, but sticking to that is difficult. And as Michael said, coaching is about accountability, and so that model really works for the clients who we see. We also find that a lot of low, moderate income clients really feel like they have nowhere to turn. They don't really have a trusted advisor in their life who they can talk to about financial issues. And their experience with financial services has not really always been positive, or it's been at a distance. For those who have an attachment to a financial institution, it's really a transactional kind of relationship. It's a teller at a bank, and even less likely nowadays, it's probably just an ATM machine. They don't have a personal relationship, or their relationship with financial services is negative. They've been involved with predatory financial services, credit counselors who have been predatory, or check cashers who have been predatory, or tax preparers that have been. So their experience isn't good, and they frequently are looking for that trusted advisor. I think that one of the obstacles that we sometimes have in engaging people is that frequently low and moderate income people feel that they don't have enough money to manage their money well. And we actually find that in a lot of cases in the nonprofit world, we may get referrals, traditionally would get referrals from other nonprofits in the community, and frequently we find that in other nonprofits, there is also an attitude of, well, they don't have enough money, and therefore they don't need those kinds of services or can't, or those kinds of services won't work for them. I think we have a really good example where one of our programs is actually located in a one-stop employment center, which sees hundreds of newly unemployed individuals weekly, and the staff in the one-stop center really felt that, well, these clients are unemployed, they really don't need financial services. Well, there's no better time for them to be really thinking about their financial condition. We also, as I said, a lot of the times people who come in are not the most financially illiterate. They have some concept of what good financial management is. Our coaching program is designed to really work with people from that point of view. We assume that they understand what they need to do, and that the coach's job is to really help them formulate a plan, encourage them, support them as they move that plan forward, and to really hold them accountable so that they'll be successful with that plan. It's sort of like, Weight Watchers or any other 12-step program, mostly about accountability. And up till now, that's been fairly successful with the group of people that we've been working with.
Great. Well, thank you, Donna. That was helpful. And we have one more discussant, Emily Waterbury. And Emily is a consultant on EARN's Wealth Care project. She, in that capacity, she helps to coordinate and manage financial coaching initiatives. And prior to that, Emily oversaw EARN's IDA program and their financial education program. And in that role, she helped to design and develop and implement their financial planning and coaching program, which was for low-income workers and one of the premier financial planning and coaching programs for low-income people. So with that, we will turn to Emily.
Great. Thanks, Karen, and thanks, Michael, for inviting me. I wanted to add some on-the-ground context to what Michael has said by describing our experiences with financial advice at EARN. And EARN is a California-based nonprofit providing match savings accounts, financial education, and money management coaching to the working poor. In 2007, we rolled out our Wealth Care project, which Karen mentioned, which is a financial coaching and planning program for low-income workers. And in the past 4 years, we've really experimented with different ways to deliver these services, getting us to where we are now, which we think is a very effective model. So the Wealth Care project is essentially a financial coaching program where clients have access to technical financial advice and financial education as well. Engagements are long-term, so clients work with a coach for up to a year, and their primary focus is on achieving their goals and, when necessary, changing behaviors to reach those goals. The coaches we work with are qualified coaches, so they've completed an EARN financial coach training, and most of them are also ICF certified coaches, so they have gone through a training that's certified by the International Coach Federation. The coach builds a really trusted relationship or a partnership with the client, and again, their focus is on helping the clients reach their own financial goals. So that, like in Donna's model, our approach is that the client really knows what they need to do and they know what's best, and the coach is really there to encourage them and support them and help them work on behavior change as needed. And the coach is really a hub, so the coach makes referrals to counselors, referrals to education opportunities, and referrals to technical advice as needed. And EARN provides the technical financial advice to clients through volunteer certified financial planners. And generally how this works is that there's a referral from the coach to the volunteer. And in this case, usually the client has a specific issue that they'd like to address that requires that technical assistance. We also provide access to clients to full financial planning engagements through a partnership between EARN, the local financial planning association, and a local university that trains planners. And I wanted to give you, I think we may be unique in how we work with CFPs, and so I wanted to give you a couple of examples for when it's been helpful for our clients to have access to certified financial planners. So I'm going to give you client A. This is a woman who had a life insurance policy that was recommended by a family member. She wasn't sure, didn't really understand the policy fully, wasn't sure whether it made sense for her and her family. And she was also had been recommended by a family member to get renter's insurance. And so the coach referred her to a planner. The planner helped the client understand her life insurance policy and gave her recommendations around this, and gave the client some sort of action items and research to do around the renter's insurance. And then the planner communicates with the client's coach, and the coach is really there to help the client on follow-through, and that's something that we found really, really helpful and really important for our clients. Another client who worked with a planner is self-employed. She was interested in beginning to save for her retirement, and she was also seeking assistance with her income taxes. And so the planner helped the client separate her business and personal expenses, asked the client to contact specific vendors and learn more about a SEP IRA, so asking the client to actually follow through and think about things like minimum balances and different types of investments, and then loop back in with the planner and coach. And she referred the client to a couple of tax preparers that work on a sliding scale basis and focus on self-employed individuals. So those are just a couple of examples for us for when it's been really helpful to work with CFPs and have volunteer CFPs work with our clients. And I wanted to close with just a few of the key lessons that we've learned in our 4 years of providing these services to our clients. First is that we found it's really important to lead with a coach, that as opposed to leading with a planner. That clients often have become overwhelmed by the planning process and the documentation it required, and that it's really important to build trust and build a partnership before clients really feel comfortable working with a planner. And often clients, if they work with a planner and they got a great financial plan, they'd come back to us and say, well, this is great, I have this great plan, but what now? And they really wanted support and needed support around implementation, which is where the coach has been really, really helpful. The second is that we feel that it's really important to hire skilled coaches. That coaching really is an art and requires a good deal of training. So we've developed our own training, and we've also, on top of that, hired people who have received, again, training through an ICF certified school. Also, in terms of attracting clients, we found that really seeing is believing with coaching, so that we really try to market coaching through sample sessions and videos so that clients really understand what it is. There are lots of different people that use the word coach, and lots of different ways that coaching is done. So we've really found that it's helpful for our clients to really kind of get a taste before they commit. And in working with planners, we've found that experienced planners really want to volunteer. They don't want to be paid. We also think that there may be a market for new planners to provide services at discounts, but we had difficulty sort of ensuring them client volume. So what we've found after several different experiments is that working with volunteers has sort of been the most successful. And also what's really worked for us on the planner front is that we've found a couple of champions in our local chapter of the FPA, or the Financial Planning Association, and they've really helped us recruit and train planners. So I think that's about it for me.
All right. Well, thank you, Emily. You helped to give a real kind of concrete face to, how financial advice is delivered at the community level. So I think that was really helpful to give a real-life example of what Michael's research talked about. So at this point, we're going to shift into the Q&A and discussion portion of this webinar, and I just want to remind folks, if you do have a question, if you look at the second icon that's under ICS Webcast, the one that looks like the little bubble, that's where you'd click and submit your question, and we'll go ahead and moderate the questions that way. I do want to remind folks that this webcast is going to be archived on the Center for Financial Security's website, so if you wanted a hard copy of the presentation, that's where you could go after this call to download it, and the website is http://cfs.wic.edu, and you can get your hard copy of the presentation there. So Michael, Donna, and Emily, are you all ready for some questions?
Be great.
All right. So, Michael, let me throw the first question to you. There was a question about one of the slides you presented, the slide that was titled Findings, Take-Up of Advisors. Under race, for African Americans, there was an increase. So the African Americans have higher take-up under insurance advisors, and someone wondered if you could just share a little bit more information about that.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and we wondered a bit about that too, and talked to some people in the field, and we think much of what that might be is that people got it. So the question is, in the last 5 years, have you gotten any form of advice about insurance issues? And what we think that a lot of people were talking about was that they met with somebody who was selling life insurance, particularly whole and term life insurance. And just from talking to folks who are very familiar with the African American communities and neighborhoods, there are a lot of sort of more door-to-door or within social networks salespeople who are involved in providing particularly regulatorily low premium sort of policies, and we think that some of that may be in that market, particularly products marketed as things like burial insurance or term insurance, that kind of thing. So we think that's what some of that is, but it is sort of an odd finding, and it wasn't a very strong finding, but one that we certainly want to look more into.
And Michael, just one more question before I go to Don and Emily. It was a similar, related question was a question about were there any other differences in race that you found?
You can see on this slide there's a handful of lower probability of taking up investment advice among Asians, and then lower tax advice among Latinos or Hispanics. Again, these are relatively small in magnitude, and probably have something to do with social networks and access in those communities. And as we've talked to people, there have been lots of ideas that are put forth, and probably lots of people on the line have some ideas behind this too. But there are a handful of places where we do see those kind of trends.
Okay. And the next question is going to be for Donna and Emily, and the question is whether either of your programs work with clients who receive public benefits, maybe in combination with some income from a job, and to what degree do your financial planners and coaches take the public benefits into account when working with a client? Are the planners and coaches able to understand and help clients to understand the asset limit for different benefits and to create a way to transition smoothly from public benefits to full independence?
This is Donna, and I would say that the majority of our coaching clients have earned income, may be supplemented by some public benefits. In fact, one of the things that we do is screen clients for eligibility for public benefits, and I would say that food stamps have been probably the primary benefit that we've helped people secure. I would say that our coaches who are volunteers and who we train are familiar with some of the asset limits, but those kinds of questions typically get turned over to professional staff who make sure that we're not providing any or that a client isn't going down the wrong path in terms of that.
Yeah, and I would second that. I mean, our coaching clients come into the program and have as a requirement that they have earned income. So there may be some situations where that is complemented with public support, but that would not be that would be the sort of minority of our clients. And again, if a coach has questions about public benefits, that's something that we would handle in-house. Our coaches are contract employees, so they would likely refer that to a staff person.
Great. Okay, I have another coaching question, and this is about becoming your own coach. The question is, I've heard that the ultimate goal of coaching is to, quote, become your own coach. What would it look like to become your own coach?
Does that mean to become a professional coach and coach other people, or coach yourself?
I'm going to have to make some assumptions since the person who wrote it, I can't speak up, but I would guess Michael talked about one of the main aspects of coaching is that self-monitoring and holding yourself accountable. So maybe how do you get to that point yourself so that you can kind of monitor and keep yourself accountable?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about coaching is that the whole premise is that a client is creative, resourceful, and whole, and knows what's best for themselves, and is truly capable. And I think that what we see happen after 6 months or a year of coaching, or even less, is that clients will then say to us, the coaching relationship often comes to a close on its own because the client has worked through some behavior change with the coach and has seen how the coach holds them accountable and has implemented sort of a personal system for being able to do this on their own. And I think that's that's sort of the greatest thing about coaching, is that the idea is that it's forward moving and that the client can really do this on their own, and maybe they just need a little support in the interim to get through some hurdles and to get them closer to where they want to go.
And I would just say that success builds success, and that's another one of the premises of coaching, is that I can think of one of our coaches who gave an interview to a newspaper reporter and who talked about the fact that a client who she worked with who had success on their financial issues, became aware. It built self-esteem, and they became aware the feeling of taking control of your financial life was really a positive force, and it ended up resulting in that person taking control over other aspects of their life. So I think the whole direction of coaching is to provide support and encouragement and hold people accountable as they become more aware of the need. They'll take that on themselves.
Great. I've got another question for Emily and Donna, and this is about the populations that your program serve. Can you talk a little bit about the demographics of who you're serving?
This is Donna, and as I said, our population is low, moderate income. I would say primarily have, they almost all have earned income. I would say that we've had some people who are perhaps on unemployment compensation. That would be probably the exception. And they are typically single mothers, typically African American and Latino, and typically under the age of 45. Usually between 25 and 45.
Emily, how about for you?
Sure. We have are also low and moderate income. So for certain programs, we have income limits set at 200% of federal poverty, and for others, we have income limits set at 80% of AMI. We serve a diverse population, and I would say primarily African American, Latino, and Asian Pacific Islander. We offer services in English, Spanish, and Cantonese. And we serve a majority of women and a majority of people with children.
Great. And this might have to be the last question, but let me see if we can squeeze it in. This is a question about the coaching aspect and the financial aspect and how to staff that. This question, the comment is, it seems like it might take at least two people to assist the client on financial issues. Is there such a thing as a financial coach where both aspects are resident in a single person, so they have the financial advice and the coaching in one person, or should the two aspects be separate?
Well, I just would clarify that a financial coach isn't really about advice. It's more of the holding accountable model. So, I think it's possible that you could have those two skills in somebody, but that's not what we're aiming for.
I think you could have, if someone is a trained technical advisor, so maybe they're a trained planner and a trained coach, they can do both. I just think that the client and coach need to understand sort of when the role is changing, right? So they're the coach, but maybe something comes up where they actually want to offer some technical advice, and that just needs to be sort of deliberate and clear so that everyone understands what role the person is playing.
Okay, I am going to sneak in one last question, and you mentioned something similar in your research, so this could be for you, for Donna, or Emily, and it's how do you motivate lower income or less financially literate people to seek advice when they may be intimidated or have trouble with access? Any advice or ideas that any of you have would be great.
No, I can kick it off, and I'll let Emily and Donna get the last word. But I think one thing we've talked today mostly about formal forms of advice. We need to recognize that people get lots of informal advice, whether it's peers, friends, and family. And so those forms of advice are very valuable as well. They may not always be accurate. So I think there's a lot of issues about how people get that information. But there are other forms of advice that are out there. But I would say, in general, the advice market does not serve the sort of vulnerable populations, low-income populations, minority neighborhoods, as well as other parts of the market. And it's an issue. The marketplace is not sort of equal in terms of access.
And this is Donna, and I would say that, one way is to be available at specific points in time of need. But I think more generally, one of the things that Co-Opportunity does is to recognize that the service we provide may not just be a standalone service, and so we work very cooperatively with other service providers in our community. So we may look at different vulnerable populations and try to integrate our services in with other services that may be available. So we may be working with victims of domestic violence, or we may be working with people who are at risk of becoming homeless, or people who are going back to work. So we recognize that we can integrate what we do into other services, community-based services, the same way that these kinds of services may be delivered at a workplace or another venue.
Yeah, and I would just add to that one of the things that's been most effective at EARN in all of our programs is really trying to build our word-of-mouth network. So, as Michael said, people listen to people they trust. So we've tried to incentivize existing savers and existing clients to refer people to us. And then the other thing is that with the coaching in particular, we really, as I mentioned before, we really try to find opportunities to give people a taste for what coaching is all about. So we'll incorporate a little coaching demonstration into existing workshops that we're running so that people understand what it is and are once they see it, they're much more likely to take us up on it.
All right. Well, Emily, I think that means you're going to have the last word for this call since we're coming up right on our end time. But before we close, I wanted to first thank our panelists and Michael for this presentation. I think it was really a helpful way to look at the research and also what's going on kind of at the ground level as well about financial advice. So I appreciate your being here. But I wanted to let everyone know that the Center for Financial Security is planning a second webinar on April the 19th at 2 o'clock. That's on a Tuesday. And the topic for that webinar is going to be understanding attitudes of disabled populations about savings and financial education. There were some fascinating focus groups that Catherine Dellum held around different attitudes towards saving, and we're going to be able to share the results of that focus group on the webinar on April 19th, so I hope you all can join us. Thank you.